Today we're looking at some Algebra 2 parent functions. So the main idea of today is really just for you to be able to hear the name of the parent function and associate two things with that. So I want to be able to say linear parent function, and I want in your brains you to say, oh, y equals x, yeah. And I want you to be able to think in your brain what that graph looks like. Same for the absolute value parent function and the quadratic parent function. Those are the only three we're looking at today. So when you hear the name linear parent function, I want you to associate that with y equals x. You've dealt with this a lot in Algebra 1. So for the graph, I'm only going to use 3 points because you already know what this looks like likely. Okay, so if I take the x value of -1, and I plug it in for x here, what is my y value? If I plug in -1 here, then y equals -1. So my y value is also -1. If I plug in 0 for x, then y equals 0. My y value is 0. If I plug in 1 for x, then my y value is 1. So those are 3 points on the linear parent function. 3 points that I need you to have memorized if you don't already. So I'm going to use this old iPhone of mine for a straight edge. Okay, so there's my straight edge. I'm going to draw my line. And there's my picture of the linear parent function. We're not going to fill out any of this stuff yet. Okay, so absolute value parent function. So when I say the words absolute value parent function, I want you to know that means y equals absolute value of x. I hope that you have had some exposure to absolute value. If not, what you need to know is anytime you plug in a number in there, what it does, and I'll explain more on this later, is make it positive. So if you plug in -6 into the absolute value of -6 is +6. The absolute value of +6 is still +6. So it takes negative numbers and makes them positive. It takes positive numbers and they stay the same. Okay, and then 0, absolute value of 0 is just 0. So if I say absolute value, you should know the equation for the absolute value parent function is y equals the absolute value of x. So you're probably not familiar with the way this graph looks, so let's generate a graph. Okay, I've chosen these x values because I want to know what's happening on the left side of the graph, so I chose some negative x values. I want you to know what's happening in the middle of the graph, so I chose 0. And I want you to know what's happening on the right side of the graph, so I chose a couple of positive values. So if you plug in -2 for x into this equation, what is the absolute value of -2? Like I told you before, it's +2. If you plug in -1 for x, the absolute value of -1 is +1. The absolute value of 0 is 0. The absolute value of +1 is still +1. And the absolute value of +2 is still +2. So let's plot these points. -2, 2. -1, 1. 0, 0. 1, 1. And 2, 2. So, using my straight edge again, what this absolute value parent function looks like is you're screaming it at home, aren't you? A V. The absolute value parent function looks like a V. Okay, so remember that. Another function that you have worked with in Algebra 1 is the quadratic parent function. So when I say the word quadratic, you should know that's y equals x squared. Okay, and again, you probably know these points, but we always like to really know what's going on the left side of the graph as well as the middle and the right side. So these are the points I have chosen, the x values. So if I plug in -2 for x here, what's -2 squared? That means -2 times -2. -2 times -2 is +4. If I plug in -1 for x, -1 squared, or -1 times -1 is +1. If I plug in 0, 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, and 2 squared is 4. Okay, so those are our coordinates. So -2, 1, 2, 3, 4. -1, 1. 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 4. So remember, while this is the quadratic parent function, you hear the word parabola a lot. Parabola. Okay, so the shape that the quadratic parent function makes is called a parabola. That's all for today.